All right. Okay. We're waiting for the other. All right. Hi, everybody. It's Monday. We're back on track, and we're back for Perchevo History and Hashkafa. A couple of things. First of all, I remind you that the this year is brought to you by was initiated by. I'm just fixing the camera up here. Sorry. Is initiated and brought to you by the Tel Aviv International Synagogue, headed by Rabbi Ariel Constantine. And this coming Shabbat, I will have the privilege of spending Shabbat frontally, non-virtually, with the community. I'm scheduled to speak Friday night, I think, at a lovely outside dinner. And those of you who have been studying with me for the past over a year, I think it's about 14, 15 months, and those who haven't are invited to please come, say hello. I'm really looking forward to seeing people in live and not just as commenters on the Facebook, on my Facebook page, on the Shoal Facebook page, on my popular whatever the case may be. Whatever the case might be. So please come, say hello. I'll be there Shabbos morning also, although I won't be performing. I'll just be there as a person going to Minyan like everybody else. And I'm looking forward to it. And I understand it's not going to be all that hot, at least not as hot as it's been. So there's a reason to brave the lack of air conditioning from your air conditioned homes to the air conditioned shul. So that's number one. Number two, let me urge you, everybody who is eligible, everybody in the sound of my voice who is over 60, please, and living in Israel, please, 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 go get your third shot. Help us beat this. Massive this wave of the Delta or the Indian variant, and take care. Most importantly, take care of yourself so you don't get seriously ill. L'chu lehitchasen, as they say on the radio all the time. Please. Okay, that's number two. Okay, so we are now we're starting a new Mishnah. We're continuing the discussions that were started by Hillel in the second chapter of Pirkei Avot. Here we are. And I'm going to read you through the comments. This is chapter 2, Mishnah 5, Mishnah Hay. What we're going to do is, as has been our wont the past few weeks, is I'll read through the whole Mishnah. We're going to break it into its component parts, and then we'll discuss each one separately. And then, if there is one, if it appears that there's a unifying theme or unifying idea which ties all of the these Mishnayot together, I'll try to develop it with you. Okay, so Hu Haya Omer, this, as I said, is attributed to Hillel Azaken, the original Hillel the Elder, who was the founder of the dynasty of the heads of the Sanhedrin. And he lived at the end of the first millennium BC and the beginning of the first millennium CE. Hu Haya Omer. This is what he was wont to say. These are Hu Haya Omer doesn't mean walk around all the time saying this. This is among the wise sayings, the Bartless quotations of Hillel. So, what did Hillel used to say? Ein Boor Yerechet. A person who is a boor. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a person who's boorish, B-O-O-R. We'll have to define what boor means. But ein boor yerechet, a person who's a boor or a boor can never be really God-fearing. Velo amaaretz, and a person who is uneducated can't be a Hassid. Cannot be pious. Now, we're going to see that the word Hassid means many different things. So in order to understand what Hassid means, we're going to learn Amaretz means, we're going to really define our terms very, very carefully. Veloha Baishan Lamed, if you are shy, that's probably the easiest way to do it. If you are shy, you'll never learn. A person who's shy can't learn. Maybe because he won't ask questions. We'll see what the problem is. Veloa kapdan milamed, and the person who is overly strict, person who's overly demanding, personally he is unforgivingly demanding, can never really be a good teacher. A good teacher has to know how to balance being demanding and I don't say being indulgent, but knowing how to sort of access the student and go to access the student. Law Kaptan Melamed. There's an interesting. Actually, there's a Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal has an interesting lecture that he gave in Hebrew. It was then published in Hebrew. I don't know if it's available. I'm just looking to see if it's in his collected essays here. I don't know if if it was translated into English. It's called Hakapdan Kimelamed. What happens when a person who is extraordinarily demanding actually does try to teach? And it's something of appreciation of his father-in-law, of Rav Soloveitchik, Mori Varabi, also who was well known, certainly up until a certain stage of his life, until actually, I know it. We all know it. To what time stage of his life? 1967 was an extraordinarily, terrifyingly demanding teacher. After 67, he lost his mother, his brother, and his most importantly, his wife in a short period of time. This period of like 3 months. That sort of changed him. He mellowed, and he wasn't as demanding. He was plenty demanding after that too, but he wasn't as scary as I understand he was before that. And so he writes an appreciation of Lichtenstein as to how that how that works. Now, by the way, so I recommend this. I actually recommend this appreciation of Rav Soloveitchik. I am sure it is on the VBM, the Virtual Beit Midrash of Har Etzion, and you can look up Hakaptan Kimelamed, and then or the demanding teacher as a teacher, something like that, in the English part of the site. Okay. Anyways, Law Kapdan Melamed, a person, but in principle, a person who's overly demanding can't really be a good teacher. By the way, a teacher who's overly indulgent, a person who's overly indulgent also can't be a good teacher. I've discovered this as a student, and also it's one of my sins. I'm overly indulgent, and I think that those students that I was more demanding of actually did better. I didn't yell and scream. I mean, there are limits. But anyways, let's go on. If you get too organized, if you too involved, if you devote yourself far too much to business, then you'll never become wise. And if they're in a place where nobody is willing to take a stand, nobody's willing to stand up, be a man. I mean, it means being forceful, being assertive, and so on. Try to do that. Okay, that's going to be a really loaded, as you can imagine, especially in contemporary time. That's going to be a really loaded statement. But anyways, we're going to start with ein Boor Yereche. A person who is a Boor cannot be truly fearing of sin. So it's really striking. So first of all, what's a Boor? What's a Boor? A Boor is not a guy who gets constantly drunk and insults all the people. That's boorish behavior in contemporary parlance. But a Boor in Hebrew, and this everybody, all of the commentators are unanimous about this. A Boor in Hebrew is a person who is totally uncultivated. In Hebrew, if you have an uncultivated field, which has never been grown. It's wild. It's out there in the middle of who the hell knows where. Okay, that's called a stable. It's never been plowed. It's never been planted. It's just I think called it virgin territory. Okay, so that's stable. So a person who is totally uncultivated means a person. Again, it's really striking. A person who's totally uneducated, totally undeveloped, totally almost on an animal, on a primal basis. He has no. I don't know, Tarzan coming out of the jungle, whatever the case might be. A person who was raised by lions, by wolves. Romulus and Remus. A person who has no intellectual achievements, is not developed in any way, shape, or form. Such a person, it can never be a person, and a person certainly not educated, can never really be sin. Can never be taught to fear sin. And again, um, the there's total unanimity in the. You never find this. This is very rare. Total unanimity among the commentaries as to why that person can't be person can't be a fear of sin. If he lives among people, he knows there are things you're not supposed to do. So um, the I'm going to read you one comment by here we are, by Rabbi Matityahu Hayitzari, who I've mentioned before. He says, first of all, Boor is worse than a person is an Amaritz. In other words, the person didn't go to school. But that doesn't mean he's not totally human. It doesn't mean he doesn't have any good qualities. So he says, a person who is a Boor is a person who not only is not educated, he has no idea to get along with people. He has no manners. He has no respect for anybody else. He's like totally narcissistic. He just he wants to satisfy his basic needs, and that's it. He says in that way, says Rabbi Matityahu Yitzhari. He says he's worse than the person in ignoramus. You could be uneducated, but you could be a mensch. You could know certain basic decency. Ki ha'ma'aretz, he says, afal pi she'ein ben Torah, even though he's not educated, he has no Torah. Yesh bo derech eretz. He knows how to act with people. Vosek b'shovo shel olam. He knows how to get along with people. So, but a person who has no. Oh, my mistake. It was not. I wasn't quoting from the Rabbi Tzari. It's quoting from Rabbi Shimon ben Tzemach Duran, who was a Spanish rabbi who ran away from Spain in the wake of the persecutions of 1391, which broke the back of Spanish Jewry, and moved to North Africa, I believe to Fez. So he writes. So that's what he writes. He writes that a person who's a Boor is a person who's just totally. He's not a mensch. You can be a mensch. You can be a person. You can be act like a human being and not be necessarily educated. Okay, some people don't have a chance to go to school. They don't have the privilege. Doesn't mean they don't know how to be decent. And that's what he. So that's what he called. And that's basically his point. And Boor Yerechei, a person has no idea how to live with other people. Such a person can never be in fear of sin. Why? Because he only cares about himself. He's going to say he only cares about himself. So therefore, you can't hear that such a person can't hear that something he's not allowed to do something. But I want it. I want to eat it. I want to do it. I want to take it. Such a person who's totally it's a sort of like an infantilization. But such a person is totally self-concerned and only worried about his own about number one. Such a person will not be able to accept restrictions. He can't be afraid. He can't. The whole idea of that there are limits upon him will be totally wasted. You can't hear. Certainly you can't hear. That's an Ein Boor Yerechei. I actually thought, and then we know people like that. The odd part of this, I'm going to throw this out there. You can think about this or not. I thought about the fact that often extremes meet in the middle. So a person who was raised in the wild and has absolutely no ability to be able to act like a person with other people is just totally self-concerned, self-contained, and therefore he can't accept any limits upon his behavior, upon his self-satisfaction. That could be from a person who never had that. It could also be from a person he's just such a narcissist that he makes himself into a Boor. I wonder. Anyways, I was also thinking about the fact that a person, say you have a person who is new to society. He's new to society. He's lived in his whole life. He has absolutely no education, absolutely no manners. He never learned basic decency vis-a-vis other people. And then you tell him that there are things you can't do. There are sins, there are crimes. He can't be sin-fearing. Maybe it's the other way. not because he can't hear the restrictions, but maybe because he's a person of extremes. Either, as we said up until now, he can't hear any restrictions on himself, or no, he thinks everything's wrong. Such a person wants to fit in. One could understand it to mean he wants to fit into such a degree that he'll become paralyzed. A yirei chet, a person who's afraid of sin fearing, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of hurting somebody, afraid of sinning against God. Such a person has to be able to know that there are things that are allowed and there are things that are not allowed. Now, it's interesting. All of the commentaries are worried about the fact that he won't be able to say there are things I'm not allowed to do. But it's also possible that such a person will go to the other extreme and say, I can't do anything. Everything's asur. For your that's my take for your consideration. I think this idea of ein boor yirei chet though will become clearer when we go to the next phrase, which is actually, I think, are going to take us up the rest of the time, and I don't think we're going to finish it. V'lo am haaretz Hassid, and a person who's an am haaretz cannot be truly pious. That seems to me very difficult statement. You mean that a person of simplicity, a person unless you're educated, you can't really be pious? Well, maybe we don't know what the word pious means. I mean, I know plenty of people that are uneducated that are spiritual and pious people, and it doesn't say what's the problem here? So yeah, we need to define am haaretz, a word ignoramus that we use very often. And the word am haaretz actually has become quite just passing. The word am haaretz has become quite better known. Let's put it this way, in the past year, because of the passing of Rav Adin Steinsaltz, whose first yortzeit was just last Monday, a week ago, exactly a week ago. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Because, excuse me, when he was a kid, his father, who was a Marxist atheist, but a very very strong Jew, said, "I don't care if you believe in God or not." He says, "But my son is not going to become an Amaretz. I refuse to let him not know stuff." And ended up going to first to Ma'aleh, and then he went to Chabad, and so on. He became who he became. What's interesting is that I had heard that story first when he was written up in Time magazine a billion years ago, and it said, and he quoted the father saying, "You shouldn't be an ignoramus." And I remember thinking my wife saying to me, says, he didn't say that. He says you should be an Amaretz. Being an Amaretz is sort of like that's not what Jewish people want to be. Anyways, but why can't you be pious? There are plenty of people that are pious and not well educated. On the contrary, that's sort of very elitist, kind of snobby kind of position, and I hope that somebody out there is thinking, wait a minute. Hassid, the whole point of Hassidut, as in the type of Hassidut that was advocated by the Baal Shem Tov, who died in 1760, with all of the different Hassiduyot now today, the whole point was to, as a pushback against the elitism of the rabbinic class, who said you can only make it if you're a big scholar, and if you're just a simple person and you're not well educated, so you have no place in the worship of God. And Hassidut came to teach you no, and we know that there's the famous stories about the little kids. There were two versions it's sort of subversions of the same story. There's a version of the story that the community was praying, and the Baal Shem Tov was upset because nobody, the prayers weren't going up to heaven. I believe it was Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, whatever the case might be. And there are two variations. What happened? For either a little kid came and he didn't know how to pray. He had never been educated. He was an orphan, whatever. And so he had a whistle. So he said, "I'm going to blow the whistle to God," and he blows the whistle, and that opened and that the sincerity of that unarticulated prayer opened up the gates of heaven to the prayers of the community, and the Baal Shem Tov was very happy and told them that that was what had done it. There's another version, a little less excuse me, the other version of the same thing is where the little kid, he knew a little bit, he knew Aleph Beis, but he didn't know how to pray, he didn't know how to read. So what he did was he just recited Aleph. He knew Aleph Beis, so he recited Aleph Beis. He keeps saying Aleph Beis over and over and over again. He says, "Here, God, are all the letters. I will." You put them together into the prayer. So the point is, below Amaretz Hassid, this kid was not a Talmid Chacham. This guy was not a scholar. This little kid. So how does it happen that? How does it happen that that they say no? These people are very pious. These little kids. So what the Baal Shem Tov, what Chassidut seems to teach, is the opposite of the Mishnah. So what's going on? So I'm going to leave the definition of an Amaretz to next time. Let's assume it just means somebody who is uneducated in Torah. Okay, a person who knows, as we saw that the Reb Shimon ben Duran said, the Tashbetz, that it can mean that a person who's an Amaretz can be a decent person. It could be a person who has good manners and has good qualities and good moral qualities and so on. Just not educated, didn't go to school. But what about a Hassid? What does that mean? So again, I think we all will assume, oh, I know what a Hassid is. A Hassid is a guy that, whatever it is. He's a Lubavitcher, he's a Belzer, he's this, he's that. But it's not true. The word Hassid, the original word, the word in the Bible, Chesed. Chassid is a person who does chesed. So what's chesed? Chesed is something which flows out of the individual. One does chesed, one is gomel chesed. Ligmol is to wean. In other words, a chesed is an act of compassion, of grace, of identification for another person. Tzedakah and chesed are two different things. Tzedakah, you write a check. You throw a couple of coins in. That's tzedakah. That's fine. That's a sort of you should perhaps identify with the person and try to be nice. And then there are all kinds of ways to give tzedakah, not to charity, or tzedakah not to take into consideration the feelings of the person who's the recipient. But tzedakah, it's sort of like there's something of a detachment to tzedakah. Chesed is something else. Chesed is something you can only do by getting your hands dirty, by getting in there and establishing a rapport with the person, physically helping them in one way or the other, especially when a person is down. What is chesed? Chesed is burying the dead, visiting the sick, helping an old person cross the street, helping an older person or a person doesn't have the means to go shopping. Chesed is something which comes from deep inside you and requires commitment. It's a deep expression of one's sense of identification and of empathy with another, which leads you to action. In other words, it is something which comes from within, and therefore, a person who is a chesed, and therefore a person who does chesed, it gives a testimony to the inner recesses of his or her spirituality and of her moral content, his or her moral content. It speaks to autonomy, because it comes from me. Tzedakah, somebody forces you to do. Chesed comes from you. It pours forth from the individual sensitivities. A chassid, therefore, in the Bible and in rabbinic literature, and in fact, up until the 18th century, up until the 17th century, meant a person who strives because of his or her inner yearnings to do more than what the Torah requires. Torah says do X. The Hassid, or the Hassid or the Hasidah feels that I have to do more. I want to do more. I want to go beyond that which the Torah demands, because I don't find that I'm able to express my relationship with God, or express my desire to be close to God, or to fill His will, capital H, capital W, with what the Torah requires, with the minimum. I need to be a maximalist. I need to live in the, to use another Talmudic phrase, lifnim mishurat hadin. I need to go beyond what the so the narrow minimum standards and requirements of the Torah. So, for example, the Torah talks about, we're going to talk about this a lot next week. The Gemara talks about a group of people who are called Hasidim Rishonim. The Hasidim, by the way, were the group from which the Maccabees emerged, or who joined the Maccabees, who decided they had to take proactive action against the Seleucid Greeks, leading up to the story of Hanukkah. But Chazal talk about Hasidim Harishonim, and these are all, and consistently who these people are. Well, as I said, we'll talk about next week. But what marks them? What marks them is the fact that they always did more than the minimum halacha was. So, for example, the Mishnah says in Masechet Brachot, it recounts that before you pray, you shouldn't just run into a shul. You should wait, come a couple of minutes early. You should sit down, get your thoughts together, think, put yourself in a frame of mind to pray, and then pray. And then afterwards, don't go running out either. Sit down for a couple of minutes. I'll do that for 3 years. Minute, sort of to be able to transition out back into the world. You need this sort of like move from inside, sort of time to move from one modality of existence to another. And then the Mishnah says, Hasidim Arishonim, but the truly pious of an earlier age, they would sit for 3 hours to meditate before they got into the mood to be able to pray, understanding the out of appreciation of the magnitude of the action that's involved, or the moment that's involved of coming to God's presence, and as a supplicant and as in a prayerful mode. And then they would sit for an hour or so afterwards as well. I don't know what happened when they did the work, but that's another story. So in other words, because of their inner spiritual needs, they would sit there and do more than the Torah responded. The Gemara in Baba Kama says that Hasidim Arishonim. Before we get let me preface that. You are responsible to make sure that what are they called? In Hebrew, they're called mifkaim. The things that can cause damage are not extant in your house. I mean, you shouldn't leave a sharp knife on the table, and you shouldn't have glass on the floor, and whatever the case might be, because the person might get hurt. That's your responsibility. You are not responsible, personally, to get rid of hazards. Has the word. Hazardous things in the street or in the public square. That's not your responsibility. However, Hasidim Arishonim, they would go beyond what the Torah requires, because they don't want people to be hurt. And so they would make sure that if there were brambles in the street, if they saw a piece of glass in the street, and somebody might get hurt, so they would take the initiative. Instead of walking around it, instead of ignoring it, instead of saying, I'm going to wait for the city, I'll wait for the municipality to clean it up. In the meantime, somebody might get hurt. They would take the initiative, and they would out of consideration for their fellow citizen, they would throw it out, or get rid of it, or kick it to the side of the road, or whatever the case might be. Okay, the law doesn't require it, but their sense of personal responsibility towards somebody else does. A Hassid always does more than the Torah actually demands. So, if that's the case, so that's the kind of Hassid that of which we are speaking of whom we are speaking in this Mishnah. Lo Amharetz Hassid. A person who's not educated cannot be that kind of pious person. But that's not true. The story, the I mean the Hassid that I've just described, um, the Hassid that I've just described, of course, doesn't fit the Chassid that I mentioned before, that like Belz and Lubavitch and all these other things, and Ger, but you don't have to be, you don't have to be particularly learned to do those things. So why is knowledge required to be able to express one's internal pious impulses? And trala, time's up. You're going to have to wait with the question till we'll have to wait with the question until next week. And as I said, those of you who are in Tel Aviv on Shabbat, please come by Tel Aviv International Synagogue Friday night. If you want to go for the dinner, I think they can still make reservations. And if not, just come through davening and say hi. I'm dying to meet, to non-virtualize all of the people who I've interacted with over the past year and a half, or a little bit less than a year and a half. And those of you in Israel who are over 60 and haven't gotten the third shot, go get vaccinated. We'll see you next week. Bye.